Hello and welcome to week 6 of Lifespan Development. This week we're going to be focusing on early childhood, so from about 2 to about 6 years old, so just before you start school, so the preschool area. First off, for the beginning of this, I'm going to answer some of your questions like I always do. This week, instead of having 2 sections, class questions and content questions, I actually have 3 sections, class questions, content questions, and Helen questions, because a bunch of you had questions about Helen Keller, so I just put them all into a separate section. And we're going to start with the class sections. What are some suggestions you have for starting and writing my case study? My biggest suggestion is go to the next slide when you're done watching this video, because it focuses on following the rubric and outlining your case study. So basically, where to start. Will the Lifespan case study be our final grade? No. So the Lifespan case study was worth 20% of your final grade, but it's not your final grade. So the homework is also worth a very large proportion of your grade, as well as the midterm and the final exam, and the 3-2-1s are worth, I think, about 10% of your grade. I would have to double check. It's all in the syllabus. When the question is asking to identify the definition, can we use the definition from the textbook? Yes, you can use the definition from the textbook when you are answering just a definition type part of the question. Just remember to cite your sources and put it in your own words. So I would prefer that you don't use quotes as much as possible, because in order to double check that you truly understand, you need to be able to put it in your own words. That said, yeah, you're allowed to use the definition from the textbook. Is our midterm time limited? Yeah, so you will have 48 hours to complete your midterm. It will be the Wednesday and Thursday of not next week, but the week after, so it's the first full week of October. One question I have is, what are your rules for late assignments? Will we not get credit? Will we get a certain amount of points deducted each day that it's late? So it depends on the situation. For the most part, if you don't contact me ahead of time and you don't do your homework, then you don't get to redo it, because I don't officially accept late assignments. That said, if you contact me ahead of time and you go, oh my God, I'm having a problem, this is happening, that is happening, I will most likely give you an extension, and then it's not late. So I don't accept late assignments, but I do give out extensions like candy. Just email me. The important thing is that you communicate with me. Okay, so now that we're done with the class questions, we're going to move on to the content questions. Starting with, are we going to learn more about Erikson's other stages of development? Yes, so each week until we get to the end of late adulthood, we're going to be focusing on a different part of Erikson's theory. So this week we're looking at early childhood and the stage of Erikson's theory that corresponds with early childhood. Next week, we're looking at middle childhood and the stage of Erikson's theory that corresponds with middle childhood, and so on and so forth throughout the semester. Parents' interactions help children manage their emotions. What if the child was raised in the foster care system? How will they develop their emotions if they don't have a parent's role in their life? So it depends on the child, and also the situation, the environment that they are in. Some foster kids are put into a good, stable environment. They are not moved very often, and these children tend to have the best outcomes from the foster care system. On the other hand, children that are moved quite often, are placed in foster care at a very, very young age, don't have that stability. They tend to have less good outcomes. They tend to, and what really the deciding factor is the stability in their lives. If you have a stable adult relationship, or a stable relationship with a single adult, then you're probably going to have a better outcome than someone who doesn't have that type of stability in their lives. When do we fully develop an understanding of language? So an adult level understanding of language, that doesn't mean adult level vocab, just the understanding of language, usually comes in about 5 years old. So that's when you are completely fluent in your language, you can use the grammar properly, you know what sounds right and what sounds wrong, and you can form sentences and paragraphs and so on and so forth. From the discussion, I noticed that more than one item could be placed under a different schema. Would placing them in a different schema be considered assimilation or accommodation? So it depends on how you moved that schema. So if you took an item, say coffee, and took it from a drinks category and you put it under a drugs category, because coffee is a psychotropic drug, the caffeine in coffee is a psychotropic drug, and you're just moving it, that's just assimilation. You are moving it from one to another because you just learned that coffee has psychotropic effects. But if you change the category, so you decide that coffee and espresso and Arabica need to go together, and you don't have a category for coffee drinks or coffee as a category, and you have to create that category, that schema, then that's accommodation because you are changing your schemas to accommodate the information. How many schemas do we generally have by adulthood? So many. Like, there isn't a number. Schemas are how we organize all of our knowledge. So we have schemas for our clothes, what goes well together, what is comfortable, what is not. We have schemas for our social cues, our social skills, so how we talk to people, what is polite, what is not, how close to stand to one another. We have schemas for knowledge, like you are all creating lifespan development schemas. This is part of what you're doing in learning, is you are assimilating and accommodating new information into your schemas so that you can better understand and access that knowledge in the future. So there are schemas for everything. There is no number for the number of schemas we have as adults. And now we're going to move on to Helen questions. A lot of you were very curious about Helen Keller and what happened later on in her life. So, was Helen mute as well? No, actually. So she had begun to speak. So she became ill at 19 months. Yes, 19 months. So she actually had begun to speak. She had a normal development up until she got ill. But then she became mute after she had her fever. At this point, she was functionally mute. She did have some vocalizations for a while. She would scream. That was in the readings. But then she basically stopped making any noise at all. Later on in life, so in her late teens and early 20s, she made an effort to begin to speak, and she did learn how to do so. It was never quite the same as a person who grew up hearing and had that kind of development. But she did learn to speak because she wanted to. A lot of deaf people don't learn to speak, and that is a perfectly legitimate choice, and there's a lot of reasons why some deaf people choose to speak and choose not to, or choose to learn to speak and choose not to. But Helen did actually choose to learn to speak, and if you would like to see her speaking, there is a link to a YouTube video of her giving a speech down below. How did Helen write this memoir? I assume they didn't have technology for her to speak into a computer or something. Was she speaking and had someone write it? So for the most part, she finger signed it. So to Annie. So Annie and she worked together her entire life. And so she basically dictated through sign language to Annie what she wanted to have said in her autobiography, and Annie typed it up. Was Annie blind or deaf, or did she just teach? So Annie was blind. When she was 8 years old, she got an eye infection, which caused her to lose most of her sight, and then it degraded further throughout her lifetime so that she was functionally blind by the time she was about 14. She attended Perkins School for the Blind in Boston, and that's where she got her teaching credentials, and that's how she ended up teaching Helen. So yes, she was blind. How did Helen Keller live the rest of her life after her teacher and her loved ones passed? So Anne stayed with Helen. They lived together as companions until 1936 when Annie died. At that point, Polly Thompson continued to live with Helen and help Helen with her day-to-day life. Polly had actually been brought on as a maid about 10 years previously and just continued her employment until she died in 1960. At that point, a nurse was brought in. So the nurse actually had been brought in to take care of Polly for the last few months of her life, and she stayed on to help Helen for the last 3 years of her life until she died. Why did Helen Keller lose both her sight and hearing from scarlet fever? And was it really scarlet fever? So we don't really know what she had. Doctors today believe it was either scarlet fever or meningitis, and they think that meningitis was more likely. Meningitis is an acute infection of the brain and the membranes surrounding the brain. And untreated meningitis, which this would have been at the time because Helen Keller was born far before there were helpful treatments for it, can cause brain damage, including the loss of sight and hearing. Did Anne live with Helen? How many hours a week did she work with Helen? So yes, Anne came to live with Helen when Helen was 7 years old, and they lived together until Anne died, I think like 40 years later. So yes. Anne pretty much worked full-time with Helen. They lived together. They worked together. That was their thing. It started out as a teacher-student type situation, and then from there, it developed into a friendship and a professional relationship as well. So they pretty much spent all of their time together. So that is it for the questions, and I'm glad that you asked such great questions about Helen because it shows that you were really interested, and I'm pleased that you're enjoying this assignment. Then so if you want to stick around to the next slide, we're going to go over the homework and look at Helen's life.